Could 2023 be the year that we finally see a SoFi buyout? There's been some chatter around Goldman Sachs potentially making a bid for SoFi in 2023, with many people in the community making their own predictions. And in this video, I wanted to address some of my thoughts around Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan in particular around a SoFi buyout in general in 2023, what I think is the likelihood and how I think that could potentially play out. So let's jump right into it. A lot of these thoughts have sparked throughout different discussions in the SoFi Weekly podcast. I mean, we've been talking about the potential of a SoFi buyout since early October in the podcast, and it becomes a more and more pertinent topic of conversation the more that the stock falls. I see that there's an increasing opportunity for a big institutional player, somebody with deep pockets, to come and make a bid for the company because the company falls further and further into value territory the more that they fall. In other words, there is an increased likelihood of a buyout in 2023 relative to 2022 because the stock has fallen so much. The inspiration for this particular video came as a result of a Reddit post which highlighted the case for Goldman Sachs to buy out SoFi. And together in this video, we're going to run through that post right now. So the post was made 4 days ago by the Reddit user Wise and Wild, and it's titled "The Case for Goldman Sachs to Buy Out SoFi." Here, this Reddit user outlines a few key points. I later responded to this on Twitter with a mini thread of my own, just laying out some of my thoughts, which I'm going to run through in this video. So starting off with a post earlier this year, Goldman Sachs failed in its internal retail banking efforts and axed the group while moving the rest to other departments. We know this, we've been covering on the SoFi Weekly podcast the progress or lack thereof of Marcus, which is Goldman Sachs's retail banking initiative, essentially their SoFi competitor, so to speak, very loosely, which has by and large been an initiative that has been unsuccessful. Just recently, Goldman Sachs let go of another 4,000 employees, most likely from other departments, which opens the door to the 2,000 employees of SoFi to come in and fill that gap. Goldman Sachs is already in the top 10 shareholders for SoFi, and Goldman needs SoFi's proven technology and growth potential. The Reddit user goes a little bit more in depth on some rumors that happened in early October, which we're going to cover. And it says, aside from this, Goldman cannot afford to wait much longer, nor can it try to build out its own fintech from scratch. They would be wise to put an initial offer north of $10 and be prepared to go much higher. So, of course, this is, a rumor post. It's something that's speculation, and it has a lot of sort of bullish sentiment or hopium, as you want to call it, built into this. I then responded on Twitter with a couple of my own thoughts, saying first and foremost, as we mentioned in the final SoFi Weekly of 2022, that the cheaper this company gets, the more tempting it will be for large institutional players to scoop it up. Because the simple fact of the matter is that legacy banks need to move in this direction. According to a Bloomberg article, the pandemic has further exposed aging and their inflexible technology at the heart of the US economy, along with a shortage of experts to fix the problem. The main reason fintech is basically able to scale so fast against legacy players is because they're not held down on legacy infrastructure and they can actually focus on innovation. So they can move much faster and make tech-based solutions that legacy players just cannot. They have to turn around a cruise ship, essentially. And this was something that I found really fascinating in a very, very scary way. 43% of US banks are still on COBOL. And COBOL, for those of you not in the tech sector, is a programming language back in the 1950s. This is before computer science was even taught at universities. It's sort of one of the founding programming languages. It's completely unheard of today because if we're speaking modern English, they're speaking Latin, to put it into a more digestible analogy. And a lot of the banking infrastructures are still running those legacy platforms because, like I said before, it is so difficult for them to turn that cruise ship around. There's so many layers on top of layers on top of layers of changes that they need to make to their infrastructure. But the fact of the matter is that they need to make it. Deloitte actually estimated that roughly 50% of legacy banks will spend all of their IT budgets on new technology investments over the next several years. And we actually heard similar rumblings from Anthony Noto earlier in 2022 in November at the Citi conference, where he said, I think we're in the pole position to win these big financial institutions, big bank deals, but it's really going to come down to when they decide to make that transition. in previous SoFi Weekly podcasts, I highlighted this dynamic as well, saying that it's a matter of when, not if, because by regulation or by innovation or by competition, these legacy players are eventually going to have to move out of their infrastructure into new, more modern technology stacks. SoFi, with Galileo and FinTech, offers an out of the box solution for them to do that. So that's why it becomes a tantalizing offer for these banks to just buy out SoFi and then use the technology platform to replace all of their old infrastructure, as opposed to trying to build it all in house and struggling to do so. It's going to take twice the budget, honestly, and probably twice or three times the amount of time required to just buy somebody out of the box. So at the highest level, this is the benefit that SoFi provides to one of these legacy players. That is essentially the justification for a legacy bank to just buy out SoFi all outright. Now, back in October, there was some completely unsubstantiated speculation around Goldman Sachs and SoFi. I'm going to play the clip from the weekly podcast back then, where we highlighted what the situation was and what it could potentially mean for these two companies. This was an interesting conspiracy theory. This is speculation, guys, so bear with me for a sec, but I found this so interesting. So this was posted on the SoFi Stock Sub. And
oh shit, I remember this.
Yeah,
Anthony Noto put in a buy order, a limit order for Goldman Sachs at $6.65. Now, Goldman Sachs is trading for
$299.
Yes.
Goldman Sachs is trading for $300 a share.
Yeah. Noto deleted his investor profile on SoFi for the first time immediately after that went viral. So this just adds to your conspiracy theory.
So here's the conspiracy theory, and then all credit due to the people on that thread who came up with the theory, basically saying that as the CEO of a public company, he's really limited in terms of what he can say. But the conspiracy theory is that that was the golden parachute. Noto has the Goldman Sachs background. He has all of the networks and the contacts there. The idea is that Goldman offered him a golden parachute with the stock falling under $5 a share in the $4, that they basically offered a buyout at $6.65. And this was his way of basically declining and announcing to the shareholder base that he declined. And look, it makes perfect sense. If you're saying that Noto declined such a huge offer back in 2017, obviously he's not going to take, relatively speaking, such a small amount today. The golden parachute theory for Goldman Sachs is super freaking fascinating. And it just goes to show, again, this whole theme of what we've been talking about, the long-term vision and that execution to get there, that determination and grit. Noto has a public account. He does all of these trades publicly. We're like, what the fuck is that doing there? Like, that's never going to get executed. Obviously not, right? Because he's
so they're thinking the 665 is Goldman Sachs' offer, and that's basically why he put that.
Exactly.
Wow.
That was a golden parachute.
I've never heard of that.
Now, of course, that's to be taken with a spoonful of salt, but we also do know that Noto has a connection because he's previously worked at Goldman Sachs for a large part of his career. And I was reading also somewhere that Goldman Sachs had previously attempted a buyout of SoFi when they were a private company, although I couldn't really find a lot of articles to support this because it was so far back and SoFi was privately listed at that time. So there are many connections between Goldman and SoFi. And as we explore Goldman Sachs a little bit more as a potential option, we know that they're scaling back their consumer unit called Marcus. Marcus was essentially, like I said before, their SoFi competitor, quote unquote. We can just frame it in that sense for this video. That was moved into their wealth management section as part of a reorg. So basically, Goldman made a complete company reorganization, and Marcus internally was seen as a big failure. The company recently announced a 4,000 people layoff in December. And another possibility here, taking all of this into context, is that the CEO, David Solomon, could be on the outskirts with Goldman Sachs' board because Marcus was seen as a failure and it was a big investment into the commercial banking aspect or the retail banking aspect. The company had layoffs, the company had restructuring, and basically the external pressures of them to compete with competitors such as Morgan Stanley might force them to do a pretty big transformational deal on the consumer banking platform, which SoFi can fill that gap for them. Again, this is to be taken with a spoonful of salt, not a grain of salt, because it's just random thoughts here that I'm having and that a lot of people have come to this conclusion as well. based on how Marcus has done, based on what Goldman Sachs and other legacy players need to do to innovate, and what SoFi offers, particularly at this time when the stock price has fallen so drastically. Now, the question of does Goldman Sachs even want a consumer side of their business because they've been divesting out of this? That's a very legitimate concern, and the answer could very easily be no, in which case SoFi is not applicable at all. But the main interest as a result of that for legacy players in general could simply be essentially to buy SoFi simply to leverage their tech platform and not be interested at all in their consumer platform. And the recent news around Goldman Sachs points us in the direction that they're divesting out of retail altogether, given the layoffs, given the consolidation. But even if they want to expand more into commercial, what are the chances that they'd go with someone new versus just leveraging an existing partner like Apple? In October, Apple partnered also with Goldman Sachs to introduce high yield savings for Apple Card holders. And in this article where I highlight this, there's a section that talks about Goldman moving towards becoming a more conventional bank, leveraging Marcus, which announced last year it had reached a milestone of over $100 billion in customer deposits after 5 years of operation. Now, this partnership with Apple will give it another angle into consumer deposits market. Now, keep in mind that this was in October, and in November and December, we had the layoffs and the restructure. So it could very easily be Goldman divesting out of that side of their business, in which case a partnership with SoFi or a buyout of SoFi wouldn't make sense for them. They would only need SoFi for the technology platform. Now, the other thing we have to talk about is whether SoFi would even accept a buyout deal. We know that Anthony Noto won't sell because he sees SoFi as the culmination of his life's work, essentially. But ultimately, we know that this is going to be a board decision, right? Shareholders are going to have to vote on this. We know that the SoFi board will never agree to a deal unless there's a huge premium involved. Normally, companies go for 50 to 100% of whatever they're trading for. In bear markets, that's a little bit exaggerated. My guess for SoFi is that the board will not accept anything under 3 to 4x of what it's trading at right now, which would be around 12 to 15 billion in terms of market cap, which could be very hard for any buyer to swallow, realistically speaking. And then we go into, a hostile takeover / poison pill conversation, which I don't really want to entertain in this video because that's a lot of, tinfoil hat conversation. But in a nutshell, the two parties have to be in agreement. In my opinion, as far as legacy players are concerned, I think Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan would be the two biggest ones to entertain because they have the deep pockets and they also have the biggest need in terms of this legacy infrastructure migrating into something more modern for their core banking platforms. Another theory that I've seen being floated around is if Noto will be the successor to one of these CEOs. For example, the successor to Jamie Dimon or to David Solomon post buyout, and that is the reason justifying the buyout in the first place. And I think this is unlikely. I think Goldman Sachs already has a successor. I think Jamie Dimon is unlikely to step down in the near future. He did note Daniel Pinto, which is JP Morgan's president, would be his replacement in case of any emergency or any health scare or anything like that. But I don't think that 2023 will be the year that Jamie Dimon wants to step down, especially because last year the board gave Jamie Dimon $50 million in options to vest after 5 more years of service. So he's basically incentivized to be there for another 5 years. So I'm not sure that succession planning is top of mind for JP Morgan right now. There is a case to be made for both Goldman and JP Morgan. I think that there's a heightened chance of a buyout offer in 2023 relative to 2022. I'm not holding my breath given the growth prospects that the company has, but I do think that this year, given the fact that SoFi has fallen so much, there is a more probabilistic chance that they would receive interest from institutions relative to when they were, a $20 billion company. And just thinking holistically, a buyout would alleviate a lot of the short-term risks associated with SoFi. So a lot of the bearish points right now is like we're heading into a recession, there's a bankruptcy risk, there's execution risk for the company not hitting their growth targets. Buyout would essentially solve all of the short-term problems, but it would seriously undermine all of the long-term growth prospects. And for myself, I'm buying SoFi, I'm dollar cost averaging, and I'm investing in them for the next 5 to 10 years. I'm invested for the long-term growth prospects over the short-term risks. So while I think that a buyout could give me a quick 3x or a 4x on my money, I think that there might be a 10, 20, 30, 50x in 10 years associated with SoFi if they can execute properly, which I think that they can, which is why I'm investing in them. However, the fact of the matter is that a lot of the legacy players are in need to innovate. I think that SoFi absolutely is going to have a legacy partner on their Galileo platform in 2023. That's one of my predictions. especially because Anthony Noto basically said so in the Citigroup Investor Conference. The tech platform that SoFi has is, in my opinion, the biggest catalyst for a buyout in the eyes of legacy companies, because they are going to be forced to move away from their legacy banking cores. It makes sense for them to partner with SoFi, essentially to become customers of Galileo. And if they're customers of Galileo, it also makes sense of them to invest in their partners, i.e. to buy out SoFi altogether. Personally, I don't think it's going to happen. I think that the probability of SoFi receiving a buyout offer is less than 20%. In 2022, I would have said maybe less than 10%. But I want to hear from you. What are your predictions for 2023 with regards to a SoFi buyout? Do you want to see this company be bought out? What do you think could happen, and how could it play out? I think this could be an interesting video to revisit a year from now and see where we stand. For right now, this is the Fundamentals of Investing podcast. If you're not following along, definitely subscribe for more SoFi content. I'll be trying to post new stuff every week around the company. Thank you so much for listening.